Story 1. Northern Lights gas station. A trap on Highway 666. The engine died with a wheeze that sounded like dying breath. Sarah Chen gripped the steering wheel harder, watching the needle on her fuel gauge kiss empty. Highway 666 stretched endlessly into the Ontario wilderness. No streetlights, no cell towers, just black forest pressing against both sides of the cracked asphalt. The kind of darkness that makes city people remember why their ancestors feared the night. She'd been driving for 12 hours straight, fleeing a life that had crumbled in Detroit. The divorce papers sat crumpled in her passenger seat next to a half-empty energy drink and the last $20 to her name. This trip to her sister's place in Winnipeg was supposed to be a fresh start. Now it looked like it might be her last mistake. Then she saw it, a pale glow through the trees ahead. Not the harsh white of LED headlights, but something softer. Warmer, like candlelight filtered through fog. The sign materialized from the darkness as she rounded a bend. Northern Lights gas station. The letters glowed with an eerie blue-green shimmer that reminded her of those supernatural documentaries she used to watch late at night. But it was open. At 2 in the morning in the middle of nowhere, it was actually open. Sarah pulled into the gravel lot, her tires crunching over what looked like broken glass. The station was old, probably built in the 70s. All angles and rust-stained concrete. But the pumps gleamed like they'd been polished yesterday. 4 of them stood in perfect rows, their digital displays glowing bright red in the darkness. That is when she noticed the cars. 11 of them, scattered around the station like abandoned toys. A rusted pickup truck with Quebec plates. A sedan with its hood popped open, engine parts scattered on the ground. A minivan with spider-webbed windows and doors hanging open like broken wings. All different makes, different years, but they shared one thing in common. They all looked like they'd been sitting here for years. Sarah's hand hesitated over the door handle. Every instinct screamed at her to keep driving, to find another station, to sleep in her car if she had to. But the fuel gauge didn't lie. She had maybe 5 miles left in the tank. Not enough to reach the next town. The night air hit her like a cold slap when she stepped out. It carried the smell of pine needles and something else. Something sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. The kind of smell that gets stuck in your throat and makes you think of things better left buried. That is when she saw the price. The digital display on pump number 3 glowed cheerfully. Regular unleaded minus 66 cents per gallon. Sarah blinked hard. Sure, she was seeing things. Gas prices hadn't been that low since her grandmother was young. Hell, even accounting for the exchange rate, this was impossible. She looked at the other pumps. Same price on all of them. 66 cents per gallon. Her practical mind kicked in. This had to be broken equipment. Some kind of malfunction that froze the display at an old price. But her bank account didn't care about logic. $20 would fill her tank and get her to Winnipeg with money left over for breakfast. She approached pump 3. Her footsteps echoing strangely in the empty lot. The display flickered as she got closer, and for just a moment, the numbers seemed to shift. $6.66. Then back to 66 cents. Just a trick of tired eyes and fluorescent light. The pump handle felt cold in her hand. Too cold, like metal left in a freezer. But it worked. The numbers on the display began climbing as gasoline flowed into her tank. 1 gallon, 2, 3. The smell of fuel mixed with that sweet rotten scent from the woods, creating something that made her stomach turn. 15 gallons exactly. $9.90. Sarah looked around for the attendant station, but the building's windows were dark. Painted over or boarded up, she couldn't tell which. There had to be a way to pay. These old stations sometimes had those ancient card readers attached to the pumps. She found it mounted on the side of pump 3. A metal box with a card slot and a small screen that glowed the same eerie blue-green as the station sign. She slid her debit card in and waited. Processing. The screen flickered. Then, payment accepted. Thank you for choosing Northern Lights. But something was wrong. The screen kept scrolling text, over and over. Thank you for your payment. Thank you for your payment. Thank you for your payment. Sarah yanked her card out and practically ran back to her car. The engine turned over on the first try, which should have made her feel better. It didn't. The headlights swept across the abandoned cars as she pulled out of the lot, and she could swear she saw movement in the minivan's cracked windshield. Just shadows. Had to be shadows. Highway 666 opened up ahead of her again, the forest closing in on both sides. The fuel gauge showed full for the first time in 3 days. Sarah pressed the accelerator, eager to put distance between herself and that creepy station. Half a mile down the road, the engine started making noise. Not the normal hum of pistons in combustion, but something else. A grinding sound, like metal eating metal. The steering wheel began to vibrate under her hands. Then the headlights flickered. A mile from the station, the car died completely. Sarah coasted to the shoulder, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned the key. Nothing, not even a click. The electrical system was completely dead. No dashboard lights, no radio static, nothing. She tried her phone. No signal, of course. But worse than that, the screen wouldn't turn on. The battery indicator had shown 60% when she checked it at the station. Now it was as dead as everything else. The silence pressed against her eardrums like water. No wind in the trees. No distant traffic. Even the normal night sounds of insects and small animals had gone quiet. It was the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the small sounds your body makes just staying alive. That is when she heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the direction of the gas station. Not the quick pace of someone trying to help, but the steady rhythm of someone who had all the time in the world. Someone who knew exactly where they were going. Sarah locked the car doors, which felt ridiculous the moment she did it. If someone wanted to hurt her, thin metal and glass wouldn't stop them. But the sound of the locks clicking gave her a tiny sense of control in a situation where she had none. The footsteps got closer, still hidden by the darkness beyond her dead headlights, but definitely getting closer. She could hear them on the gravel shoulder now, then on the asphalt itself. Steady, patient, like a metronome marking time until something terrible happened. Then they stopped. Sarah held her breath, straining to see through the windshield. The darkness was complete. No moon, no stars visible through the forest canopy. Just black pressing against black, playing tricks on eyes that desperately wanted to see something, anything. A tap on the driver's side window made her jump so hard she hit her head on the roof. A face peered in at her, pale, male, wearing a gas station uniform with a name tag that read attendant. But the face was wrong. Not deformed or monstrous, just wrong. Like someone had tried to draw a human face from memory and got all the proportions slightly off. The eyes were too far apart, the mouth too wide, the nose too flat, and it was completely blank. No expression at all, not angry or threatening or even curious. Just blank, like a mannequin. This face. "Thank you for your payment," it said. The voice was muffled by the glass, but she could hear it clearly. Too clearly, like it was speaking directly into her brain. Sarah fumbled for the keys, trying to start the car again. The engine turned over once, twice, then died. The thing outside just stood there, watching with those too far apart eyes. "Thank you for your payment," it repeated. Same tone, same inflection, like a recording playback. The car finally started on the fourth try. Sarah threw it in drive and floored the accelerator, not caring that she nearly clipped the thing standing by her window. In the rearview mirror, she saw it watching her go. Still motionless, still blank-faced, still repeating those same 4 words. She drove for 20 minutes before she realized she was going in circles. The same stretch of highway, the same bend in the road, the same cluster of dead trees shaped like grasping fingers. The fuel gauge still read full, but that grinding sound was getting worse. The steering wheel fought her like it had a mind of its own. Then she saw the glow through the trees again. Northern Lights gas station. No, that was impossible. She'd been driving away from it. Straight down Highway 666. No turns, no side roads. But there it was, exactly as she left it. The same abandoned cars scattered around the lot. The same glowing pumps. The same blank-faced attendant standing next to pump 3. Sarah's hands shook as she tried to turn the wheel to keep driving past the station. But the car had other ideas. It pulled into the gravel lot like it was following a preset path. Like it knew exactly where it belonged. She managed to stop next to the pickup truck with Quebec plates. Up close, she could see that its tires had rotted away completely. The metal rims sat directly on the gravel, rust eating through them like cancer. The windshield was covered in a film of something that wasn't quite dirt and wasn't quite mold. The attendant walked over to her car. Same steady pace, same blank expression. It stopped next to her window and leaned down, that too wide mouth moving with mechanical precision. "Thank you for your payment." Sarah tried to start the car again. The engine turned over, caught for a moment, then died with a sound like a death rattle. She could smell something burning. Wiring, maybe, or something worse. The attendant reached for her door handle. That broke her paralysis. Sarah burst out of the passenger side door and ran. Not toward the highway. That was obviously a trap, but into the woods. If she could lose this thing in the trees, maybe find a real road, maybe flag down help. The forest was worse than the station. Trees pressed close together, their branches interlocked overhead like a ceiling of bones. The ground was soft under her feet, covered in decades of rotting leaves that gave way with each step like walking on graves. And the smell was stronger here. That sweet rotten stench that made her think of things best left undisturbed. Behind her, she could hear the attendant following. Not running, just walking at that same steady pace. They need to hurry. It knew these woods, knew where every path led, knew she had nowhere to go. Sarah stumbled over a fallen log and went down hard, her palms scraping against bark and stone. When she looked up, she saw them. More faces in the darkness between the trees. Blank faces, all wearing the same gas station uniform, all watching her with those too far apart eyes. "Thank you for your payment," they said in unison, a chorus of mechanical voices that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She got up and ran harder, branches whipping at her face and arms. But everywhere she turned, there were more of them, standing motionless between the trees, waiting for her to exhaust herself, waiting for her to understand what she really purchased with her $9.90. The trees began to thin ahead. Sarah pushed through a wall of brambles and found herself back in the gas station lot. Right where she started, the attendant stood next to her car, holding something in its hand. Her debit card. "Thank you for your payment," it said, offering the card back to her. Sarah looked at her car, at the 11 other vehicles scattered around the lot, at the attendant. This blank, patient face. She understood now the real price of that 66-cent gasoline. The reason why 11 other drivers had stopped here on dark nights, drawn by an impossible bargain. The reason why their cars sat rotting in the gravel, slowly becoming part of the station, this collection. She took the card. What else could she do? The plastic was warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight. But there was no sun here, just the strange glow of the pumps and the endless darkness of Highway 666. "Thank you for your payment," the attendant said again. Sarah walked back to her car and got in. The engine started immediately. The fuel gauge still read full. She put it in drive and pulled out of the lot, following the same path she'd taken before. 20 minutes later, she was back at the station. The attendant was waiting for her. It was always waiting. "Thank you for your payment." This time, Sarah didn't try to run. She knew now that there was nowhere to go. Highway 666 was a circle, and the Northern Lights gas station was the center. The 11 cars around her were proof of that. 11 other drivers who thought they were getting a deal, who learned too late that some bargains cost more than money. She parked next to the minivan and turned off the engine. Through the cracked windshield, she could see bones scattered across the front seats. A child's car seat in the back, empty except for shadows. The attendant appeared at her window. "Thank you for your payment." Sarah nodded. She understood now. The station needed attendants. 11 cars meant 11 drivers, and 11 drivers meant 11 new faces to wear the uniform. To stand in the woods and guide lost travelers to the pumps. To repeat the same 4 words that bound them all to this place. She got out of the car and walked to the station building. The door opened for her, revealing a small room filled with gas station uniforms hanging on hooks. Each one had a name tag. Attendant. All of them exactly the same. Sarah put one on. It fit perfectly. When she walked back outside, the other attendants were waiting for her. 11 blank faces in identical uniforms. She could see herself reflected in their too far apart eyes, could see her own face becoming blank and patient and mechanical. "Thank you for your payment," they said together. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, to protest, to scream. But the only words that came out were, "Thank you for your payment." The next morning, if morning ever came to Highway 666, there were 12 cars in the lot. 12 attendants standing in the woods, waiting for the next traveler to see that impossible price. 66 cents per gallon. Such a deal, such a bargain. The kind of supernatural horror that turns American highways into creepypasta legends. The kind of scary story that makes you check your fuel gauge twice before driving through the deep woods. The kind of ghost tale that reminds you why some prices are too good to be true. Highway 666 still runs through the Ontario wilderness. The Northern Lights gas station still glows in the darkness. its pumps still advertising that impossible price. And somewhere in the woods, 12 attendants wait patiently for the next customer. For the next payment. Because at the Northern Lights gas station, you don't just buy gasoline. You buy a one-way ticket to forever. Thank you for your payment. Story 2. Camp Silent Hill. Children in the fog. The children were screaming when Marcus found them. Not the happy shrieks of kids playing games, but something else. Something that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Marcus Chen dropped his clipboard and ran toward the sound, his sneakers slipping on the wet dock planks of Camp Silent Hill. 3 days. The missing kids had been gone for 3 whole days. Lake Okanagan stretched out before him like a dark mirror, its surface barely disturbed by the morning fog that clung to the water like ghostly fingers. Somewhere beneath those black waters, local legends claimed, lived Ogopogo, the lake monster that had haunted British Columbia folklore for generations. But Marcus had bigger problems than old stories right now. He was the camp director, and 5 children had vanished on his watch. The screaming stopped as suddenly as it had started. Marcus froze at the edge of the dock, his heart hammering against his ribs. The silence was worse than the noise. Way worse. It pressed against his eardrums like the weight of deep water. Then he saw them, 5 small figures emerging from the fog at the far end of the lake, walking in perfect single file along the muddy shore, moving too slowly, like they were sleepwalking, or like something else was controlling their movements. Emma Rodriguez, age 8, missing since Tuesday. Tyler Kim, age 9, last seen playing hide and seek near the boathouse. The Patterson twins, Jessica and James, both 7, vanished during afternoon swim time. And little Amy Chen, no relation to Marcus, just shared the same last name. 6 years old, the youngest camper at Silent Hill. They were all there, all walking toward him through the supernatural fog that seemed to follow them like a living thing. But something was wrong with their skin. Even from 50 yards away, Marcus could see it had turned a sickly green color. Like algae, like pond scum, like something that had been underwater too long. Marcus pulled out his radio with shaking hands. Base camp, this is Marcus. I found them. I found the missing kids. Send medical to the main dock immediately. Static answered him. Then a voice crackling through the speaker. Copy that. Marcus. How are they? Are they hurt? Marcus stared at the approaching children. Their movements were too coordinated, too precise, like they were marching to music only they could hear. And their eyes, even from this distance, he could see their eyes were completely black. Just send medical, he whispered into the radio. Send everyone. The children reached the dock and stopped. All 5 of them standing in that perfect line, water dripping from their clothes and hair. The green tint to their skin was even more obvious up close. It covered them completely, from head to toe, like they had been dipped in paint. Or like they had been marked by something. Kids? Marcus took a careful step forward. Are you okay? We have been looking everywhere for you. Emma Rodriguez, the oldest, turned her black eyes toward him. When she opened her mouth to speak, lake water poured out. Actual water, streaming down her chin and onto the dock boards. He said the lake is hungry, she whispered. The other children nodded in unison. The lake is hungry. The lake is hungry. The lake is hungry. Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. This was not possible. Kids did not disappear for 3 days and come back looking like they had been living underwater. They did not speak in chorus about hungry lakes. They did not have skin the color of algae and eyes like oil spills. But here they were. Medical arrived 20 minutes later, along with half the camp staff and 2 Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers who had been coordinating the search. By then, the children had been sitting on the dock in perfect silence, staring out at the lake like they were waiting for something. Dr. Sarah Kim, the camp medic, approached them slowly. She was Tyler's aunt, had volunteered to work at the camp to spend time with her nephew. Now she knelt beside him with tears in her eyes. Tyler, honey. It's Aunt Sarah. Can you tell me what happened? Where have you been? Tyler turned those black eyes toward her. Lake water dribbled from the corner of his mouth when he spoke. He said the lake is hungry. Who said that? Sweetie, who told you the lake was hungry? But Tyler had already turned back to stare at the water. All 5 children sat motionless, their green skin glistening in the morning sun. Waiting, Dr. Kim tried to examine them, but her instruments gave impossible readings. Their body temperature registered at 52 degrees. Hypothermia should have killed them. Their pulse rates were so slow they were barely detectable. And when she tried to draw blood for testing, the liquid that came out was not red. It was green, the same color as their skin. The RCMP officers, Constable Williams and Constable Torres tried asking questions. Where had the children been hiding? Who had they been with? What did they remember about the past 3 days? Same answer every time. He said the lake is hungry. Marcus stood at the edge of the group, watching the fog roll across the water. It moved wrong, not like normal weather patterns, but with purpose, like it was searching for something. The local Okanagan people had stories about the fog, about how it would come for children who played too close to the water after dark, about how Ogopogo was not just a lake monster, but something much older, much hungrier. We need to get them to a hospital, Dr. Kemp said. This is beyond anything I can handle here. Their vital signs are all wrong. They need specialized care, but when they tried to move the children, something horrible happened. The moment Constable Williams touched Emma's shoulder, she began to scream. Not the normal scream of a frightened child, but a sound like drowning, like water filling lungs. The other 4 children joined in immediately, creating a chorus of liquid terror that echoed across the lake. And the fog responded. It surged toward the shore like a living thing, moving faster than any natural weather. Within seconds, it had swallowed the dock, the children, the entire shoreline. Marcus could not see his own hands in front of his face. The world had become a gray-green nightmare of swirling mist and echoing screams. Then silence. When the fog cleared 5 minutes later, the children were gone again. This time, they took Dr. Kim with them. Marcus found her medical bag sitting on the dock, its contents scattered across the wet boards. Her stethoscope hung over the edge, dangling into the dark water below. But there was no sign of Sarah Kim herself. No footprints, no trail, nothing. Just 5 small wet spots where the children had been sitting. The search that followed was the largest in British Columbia history. Helicopters combed the lake. Dive teams explored every inch of the bottom. Search and rescue teams covered hundreds of square miles of wilderness. The story made international news. 6 people vanished from a summer camp. Mysterious circumstances. Possible supernatural involvement. The kind of creepypasta that spreads through American horror forums like wildfire. But Marcus knew they would not find anything. You could not find people who had been taken by the lake itself, who had been claimed by something that lived in the deepest, darkest parts of Okanagan's waters. Camp Silent Hill closed permanently 3 days later. Marcus packed his things and drove back to Seattle, trying to forget the sound of children screaming like they were drowning in air. Trying to forget the way the fog had moved with intelligence and hunger. Trying to forget Sarah Kim, his final words before the mist took her. My God, what are they becoming? But forgetting was impossible, because every night, Marcus dreamed of green children walking along the bottom of the lake. Their black eyes staring up through the water, their mouths opening and closing like fish, but instead of bubbles, words came out. He said the lake is hungry. 6 months later, Marcus received a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph taken by a tourist at Lake Okanagan. In the background, barely visible through morning fog, 6 figures stood waist deep in the water. 5 children and 1 adult. All of them had green skin. All of them were staring directly at the camera. On the back of the photo, someone had written in a child's handwriting, "Come play with us." Marcus threw the photograph away, but it appeared on his kitchen table the next morning. And the morning after that. Always the same image, always the same message, the supernatural calling card of something that refused to be forgotten. The final photograph arrived on a Tuesday. Same 6 figures in the water, but this time they were closer to shore. Close enough to see their faces clearly. Close enough to see that they were smiling. Sarah Kim's face was just as green as the children's now. Her eyes just as black. And when Marcus looked closely at the water around their legs, he could see other shapes. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All the people who had ever gone missing around Lake Okanagan over the years. All the swimmers and boaters and hikers who had simply vanished without a trace. They were all there, standing in the dark water, waiting for new friends to join them. Waiting for the lake to get hungry again. On the back of this final photo, the message was different. Written in an adult's handwriting that Marcus recognized as Dr. Kim. The children are not the only ones who play hide and seek here. Your turn. Marcus never made it back to Seattle. His car was found 3 weeks later in the parking lot of a roadside diner near Penticton. The engine was still running. His wallet and phone were on the front seat. But Marcus Chen was nowhere to be found. The diner's security camera caught him walking toward the lake at 2 in the morning. Walking with that same slow, purposeful pace that Marcus remembered from the missing children. His skin had already started to turn green. By morning, The fog had rolled in again. And somewhere beneath the dark waters of Lake Okanagan, 7 new voices joined the chorus of the drowned. 7 new servants of whatever ancient thing claimed the deepest part of the lake as its hunting ground. The local Okanagan people were not surprised. They had been telling stories about the hungry water for generations. About how Ogopogo was not a monster at all, but a guardian. Something that collected the souls of those foolish enough to disturb its domain. Something that turned its victims into bait for the next batch of victims. Camp Silent Hill remains closed. The buildings still stand on the shore, slowly rotting in the mountain weather. Sometimes, tourists report seeing lights in the windows after dark. Children, its voices singing camp songs. The sound of games being played in empty cabins. But the smart tourists do not investigate. They drive past quickly, windows up, radio turned loud to drown out the sound of small voices calling from the water. Come play with us. Come play hide and seek. The lake is so very hungry. And on foggy mornings, when the mist rolls thick across Okanagan, its surface, people swear they can see figures standing in the shallows. Green-skinned people with black eyes and patient smiles. Children and adults together, holding hands in a line that stretches as far as the eye can see. All of them waiting, all of them watching, all of them hungry for new friends to join their eternal game of hide and seek. Because at Lake Okanagan, when you play hide and seek, you are not just hiding from other children. You are hiding from the lake itself. And the lake always wins. He said the lake is hungry. Still hungry. Always hungry. Forever. Story 3. Watergate Motel. Overnight guest at 2:37. The knock came at 3:17 a.m. 3 deliberate raps that cut through the Quebec winter like a blade through bone. Sarah Chen bolted upright in the sagging motel bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Room 237 at the Watergate Motel was supposed to be empty except for her. The desk clerk had made that crystal clear when she checked in 6 hours ago, desperate for shelter from the blizzard that had turned Highway 15 into a death trap. Another knock, slower this time, more deliberate. The sound echoed through the thin walls like something from an American horror movie she'd seen as a kid. The kind where the protagonist always opens the door. The kind that spawned 1,000 creepypasta stories online. Sarah's laptop glowed on the rickety desk, displaying the halfway finished article about abandoned prisons that had brought her to this godforsaken corner of Quebec. The Watergate Motel had been built on the bones of Prison 514, a juvenile detention center that closed in 1987 after what the locals called the incident. Nobody wanted to talk about the incident. That's what made it perfect for her ghost story series. She grabbed her phone. No signal. Of course, the knock came again. 3 times. Always 3 times. Sarah crept toward the door, her bare feet silent on the threadbare carpet. The peephole showed nothing but darkness and swirling snow. But something was wrong with the door itself. Small handprints, bloody and fresh. Children, its hands pressed against the wood at chest height, as if someone had been trying to push their way out from the inside. Her breath caught in her throat. The prints hadn't been there when she locked the door before bed. She was sure of it. "Hello," she whispered, immediately regretting the cliché. This was exactly how every supernatural horror story began. The stupid protagonist who investigates instead of running. Silence. Then, from somewhere impossibly close, the sound of crying. Soft at first, then growing louder. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside her room, from the bathroom. Sarah's skin crawled. She checked the bathroom twice before settling in for the night. Old habits from years of investigating allegedly haunted locations for her blog. The bathroom had been empty. Just cracked tiles and a shower that looked like it hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. The crying grew more distinct. Multiple voices. Children's voices, high and broken with despair. She grabbed the baseball bat from her overnight bag. Paranoia had served her well in her line of work, even if her friends thought she was crazy for carrying protection to investigate ghost stories. American urban legends were one thing, but real danger was another. The bathroom door stood slightly ajar. She was certain she left it closed. "I know you. In there?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm calling the police." The crying stopped. In the sudden silence, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. The sound of small feet shuffling across wet tile, moving toward the door. She raised the bat, her hands slick with sweat despite the cold that seemed to seep through the motel's walls. The temperature in the room had dropped at least 10 degrees in the past few minutes. The bathroom door creaked open another inch. Then another. Sarah backed toward the window, keeping her eyes fixed on the growing gap of darkness beyond the door. Her rational mind screamed that this was impossible. Children couldn't be hiding in her bathroom. The room had been locked. She had the only key, but her gut knew better. Her gut had kept her alive through 3 years of investigating places where people claimed to see things that shouldn't exist. Places like the Mothman, the stomping grounds in West Virginia, or the abandoned shopping malls where teenagers swore they'd seen figures that moved wrong. The crying started again, closer now, much closer. A small hand appeared around the edge of the bathroom door, pale and thin, with fingernails bitten down to the quick. Then another hand, and another. Too many hands for one child. Sarah's throat closed. This wasn't just some scary story anymore. This was real, and it was happening to her. The hands pushed the door fully open, revealing the bathroom, its interior. What she saw made her legs nearly give out. The bathroom was exactly as she left it. Empty. The hands belonged to nothing. They hung in midair, disconnected from any body, moving with purpose and intelligence. One of the hands pointed at her. The fingernail was black with what looked like dried blood. "You shouldn't have come here," a voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. A child's voice, but wrong somehow. Too old, too knowing. Sarah swung the bat at the nearest hand. It passed through empty air. The hand didn't even flicker. "The children of 514 dawn, like visitors," the voice continued. They've been waiting so long for someone to play with." More hands appeared, dozens of them, floating through the room like balloons filled with malice. They reached for her, grasping at her hair, her clothes, her skin. Where they touched, she felt a cold so intense it burned. Sarah ran for the door, but the bloody handprints were spreading across its surface like spilled paint. The prints formed patterns now, words spelled out in a child's unsteady handwriting. "Help us. We still here. Dawn, to leave us alone." She yanked at the door handle. It wouldn't budge. The metal was so cold it seared her palm. Behind her, the crying had become a chorus. Dozens of voices, all children, all in agony. They spoke in unison now, their words overlapping into a symphony of horror. "Stay with us. Play with us. Be like us." Sarah spun around. The floating hands had multiplied, filling the room like a swarm of pale moths. They moved in coordinated patterns, spelling out messages in the air. "Room 237 used to be the solitary wing. We died here, alone, scared. Now you understand." The temperature plummeted further. Sarah's breath came out in white puffs that hung in the air like accusations. Ice began forming on the windows, spreading in crystalline patterns that looked disturbingly like tiny handprints. She tried the window next. The latch was frozen solid, and beyond the glass, the blizzard raged with supernatural fury. Even if she could get it open, she'd die of exposure within minutes. "What do you want?" She screamed at the hands, at the voices, at whatever presence had turned her research trip into a nightmare. The crying stopped abruptly. In the silence, she heard new sounds. Footsteps in the hallway outside. Small footsteps, like children running. But the sounds were wrong. Too light, too quick, as if the feet making them barely touched the ground. Or as if they weren't attached to anything solid. The footsteps circled her room, running laps around the building, faster and faster, until they became a continuous sound like rain on the roof. Then laughter. High, bright children, this laughter that should have been joyful but instead sent ice through her veins. "We used to run in circles in solitary," the voice explained. "Around and around until our feet bled. The guards thought it was funny. They'd time us, see how long we could keep going before we collapsed." One of the floating hands pressed against the window, leaving a bloody print on the glass. "Some of us never stopped running." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to think. There had to be a logical explanation. Mass hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. Carbon monoxide poisoning from the ancient heating system. Something that didn't involve actual ghosts. But when she opened her eyes, a child stood in front of her. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, wearing a gray uniform that marked him as an inmate of the old prison. His face was pale and drawn, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless fear. He was also translucent. She could see the bathroom door through his chest. "You were writing about us," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "About what happened here?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. People should know. But you can leave now, If you leave, you'll forget. You'll change the story. Make it safe. Make it fiction. More children appeared. Boys and girls ranging in age from maybe 8 to 16. All wearing the same gray uniforms. All bearing the same expression of infinite sadness. We won. But you forget, they said in unison. The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Watergate Motel hadn't been built on the site of Prison 514. It had been built from Prison 514. The same walls, the same rooms, just cleaned up and given a fresh coat of paint to hide the history. Room 237 had been a solitary confinement cell. These children had been locked in here, alone and terrified, until they died of neglect or worse. The incident, she whispered. The ghostly children nodded. Fire, one of them said. Started in the kitchen, said another. Spread fast, added a third. They locked our doors, they all said together. Left us to burn. Sarah's laptop screen flickered. Words appeared on her document, typing themselves. The Watergate Motel sits on cursed ground. The children of Prison 514 died screaming, locked in cells while flames consumed everything they ever known. Their spirits remain, trapped in the place of their greatest suffering, waiting for someone to tell their story. But some stories demand a price. We're not evil, the first boy said. We're just lonely. It's been so long since anyone stayed in our room. 37 years, said a girl with pigtails. 37 years. 4 months, and 16 days, corrected another child. Sarah looked around the room. The floating hands had arranged themselves into a circle, palm to palm, as if the children were holding hands. What happens if I stay? She asked. You become part of the story, the boy replied. Forever, and if I leave, you forget. The story becomes just another creepypasta. Just another fake ghost tale for people to read and dismiss. Sarah stared at her laptop screen. The cursor blinked after the last line, waiting for her decision. She thought about her life outside this room, her apartment in Boston, her cat, her editor who was waiting for this article, her sister who worried she spent too much time chasing ghosts. Then she looked at the children surrounding her, really looked at them, beyond the supernatural horror of their appearance. She saw what they truly were. Kids who had died alone and afraid, forgotten by a world that had moved on without them. How many people have stayed in this room since you died? She asked. You, the first, the girl with pigtails admitted. Most people don't make it past the front desk. Something about the place makes them uncomfortable. Sarah understood. She felt it too, the moment she walked into the lobby. The wrongness that clung to this place like smoke. Most people would have found another motel, blizzard or no blizzard. But she stayed. She always been drawn to the dark places, the forgotten corners where tragedy lingered like a stain. If I write your story, she said carefully, if I tell people what really happened here, will you let me leave? The children exchanged glances. Some nodded. Others shook their heads. We've been lied to before, the boy said. Adults promise things they don't. Do you mean, but you're different, the girl added. You see us. Really see us. Sarah made her choice. She sat down at the laptop and began to type. Not the sanitized version she planned, full of vague suggestions and atmospheric descriptions. The real story, the names of the children who died, the corruption that led to the fire, the cover-up that followed. As she wrote, the temperature in the room began to rise. The ice on the windows melted. The bloody handprints on the door faded. The children gathered around her, reading over her shoulder. When she finished, she looked up to find tears on their ghostly faces. Thank you, the boy whispered. One by one, the children began to fade. Not disappearing, but becoming lighter, more peaceful. Will this really help? Sarah asked. Stories have power, the girl with pigtails said. When people read about us, remember us. We're not alone anymore. The last child to fade was the boy who had spoken first. As he disappeared, he left Sarah with a final message. Room 237 will always be ours. But now it's yours too. If you ever need to remember why you do this work, come back. We'll be waiting. Then Sarah was alone. She looked at her laptop screen. The story was there, exactly as she written it. 30 pages of truth that would probably get her sued, fired, or both. She saved the file and closed the laptop. The door handle turned easily now. The hallway beyond was empty and normal, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that hummed with electrical current instead of ghostly voices. Sarah packed quickly and checked out, leaving cash on the front desk. The night clerk was nowhere to be seen. As she drove away through the dying blizzard, she glanced back at the Watergate Motel one last time. In the window of room 237, she could swear she saw small faces pressed against the glass, watching her go. She published the story 3 days later. It went viral within hours, spawning documentaries, investigations, and renewed interest in the children who died at prison 514. The Quebec government was forced to acknowledge what had happened and create a memorial. But Sarah never forgot the price of the story. Sometimes, late at night in her Boston apartment, she'd hear the sound of children crying. Not in distress, but in gratitude. And sometimes, when she was working on a particularly difficult piece about some forgotten tragedy, she'd find new words appearing on her screen. Words in a child's handwriting, offering encouragement and reminding her why the dark stories mattered most. The Watergate Motel still stands. Room 237 is permanently closed to guests, but the door remains unlocked. Local teenagers dare each other to spend the night, but few make it past the threshold. Those who do report the same thing, the sound of children playing, finally at peace. But they also report something else, something that keeps Sarah awake some nights, wondering if she made the right choice. They say that if you listen closely in room 237, you can hear the sound of typing. Someone working late into the night, writing stories that need to be told. Stories about the forgotten, stories about the lost, stories that demand a witness. And if you were very quiet, very still, you might hear a woman's voice whispering to invisible children. Don't worry. I won't let anyone forget you. The ghostwriter of the Watergate Motel, documenting every tragedy that ever occurred within those walls. Forever. Story 4. Logger of Death Valley. The screaming started at midnight. Human screams that cut through the Canadian wilderness like a chainsaw through bone. Marcus Webb crouched behind a fallen pine tree, his camera equipment scattered around him like broken dreams. 3 days ago, he'd been just another YouTube creator chasing views with ghost stories and urban legends. Now he was hiding from something that made every American horror movie seem like a children's bedtime story. The bunker entrance gaped open 20 yards ahead, a concrete mouth in the hillside that shouldn't exist in Banff National Park. The park rangers had never mentioned any military installations out here. Neither had the Sasquatch research forums where Marcus spent most of his time. He found it by accident while investigating the 414 incident. The famous Bigfoot sighting that had put this remote corner of Alberta on every cryptid hunter's map. A logger named Jim Patterson had claimed he saw a 9-foot creature carrying what looked like human dolls through the forest. The screaming stopped. In the sudden silence, Marcus heard something worse. The sound of wood scraping against concrete. Hundreds of pieces of wood, all moving at once. He pressed record on his phone. The supernatural horror community would pay good money for authentic footage. If he survived to upload it. Movement flickered in the bunker's dark entrance. Shapes that looked almost human but moved wrong. Too stiff, too jerky. Like marionettes controlled by a drunk puppeteer. Marcus had seen enough creepypasta videos to know when to run. But his feet wouldn't move. Something about those shapes held him frozen, the way a snake hypnotizes a mouse. One of the figures stepped into the moonlight. It was a man, or had been a man. His arms hung at impossible angles, connected to his body by what looked like thick wooden dowels. His head lolled to one side, supported by a crude hinge mechanism carved into his neck. The figure's mouth opened and closed in mechanical rhythm, but no sound came out. Behind him, more puppets emerged from the bunker. Men, women, children, all converted into grotesque wooden marionettes. Marcus finally found his voice. A strangled whisper that barely qualified as human speech. What the hell? The nearest puppet, his head snapped toward him with a sound like breaking branches. Its eyes were gone, replaced by dark holes where strings disappeared into its skull. Then Marcus heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Each step shook the ground like thunder. Something massive was moving inside the bunker, coming closer to the entrance. Marcus grabbed his camera and ran. Behind him, the puppet army gave chase. Their wooden feet struck the forest floor in perfect unison, creating a rhythm that sounded like a giant's heartbeat. Marcus crashed through underbrush, his mind reeling. This wasn't how Sasquatch encounters were supposed to go. The creature was supposed to be shy, elusive, a gentle giant that avoided human contact. Not a puppet master turning people into living dolls. A branch caught his jacket, spinning him around. Through the trees, he could see the bunker clearly for the first time. It was huge, much bigger than the entrance suggested. The concrete structure stretched back into the hillside like a tomb for giants. And carved into the stone above the entrance, barely visible in the moonlight, were words that made his blood freeze. He does not like noise. The puppets had stopped chasing him. They stood in a perfect semicircle around the bunker entrance, their strings disappearing up into the darkness above the trees. Something moved in that darkness. Something so large it blocked out the stars. Marcus raised his camera, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it steady. The night vision display showed him what his eyes couldn't quite process. It was a Sasquatch, but not the gentle forest dweller from American folklore. This creature was wrong in every possible way. Its fur was matted with what looked like dried blood. Its hands ended in fingers that were too long, too thin. Tool-using fingers that could carve wood with surgical precision. And from its shoulders and arms hung hundreds of strings, puppet strings that stretched down to the figures below like a spider, its web made of nightmare. The creature, his eyes found Marcus through the camera lens. They glowed with an intelligence that was ancient and utterly alien. Not the warm intelligence of a forest guardian, but the cold calculation of something that viewed humans as raw materials. Marcus tried to run again, but his legs gave out. He collapsed behind a boulder, his camera still recording as the creature began to move. The Sasquatch descended from the trees like a massive spider, using the puppet strings to lower itself toward the ground. Each movement sent ripples through its army of human marionettes. As it moved, Marcus could see more details that his mind didn't want to process. The creature's chest was split open, revealing a hollow cavity filled with what looked like woodworking tools. Knives, drills, saws, all the equipment needed to convert living humans into wooden puppets. The creature landed silently despite its size. Up close, Marcus could see that its fur wasn't fur at all. It was carved wood, painted and textured to look like animal hair. The entire creature was artificial, a puppet itself, but one so large and complex that it had achieved a kind of mechanical life. Who had built it? Who could have created something so elaborate and horrifying? The answer came to him as he noticed details carved into the creature, his wooden skin. Names and dates, carved in tiny script. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Jim Patterson, 1987. Sarah Mitchell, 1992. David Chen, 2003. Every person who had gone missing in these woods over the past 40 years. They just converted into puppets. They were incorporated into the master puppet itself, their identities carved into its hide like trophies. The creature, his head swiveled toward Marcus, his hiding spot. Its wooden features shifted into what might have been a smile if it hadn't been so utterly inhuman. When it spoke, its voice was a chorus of every person it had absorbed. Men, women, children, all speaking in perfect unison. He does not like noise, they said, but he likes visitors. The puppet army began moving again, surrounding Marcus, his boulder. Their wooden feet made no sound now, as if the creature had learned to muffle their steps. Marcus tried to scream, but no sound came out. His throat had locked up with terror so complete it was almost peaceful. The creature reached down with one impossibly long finger and gently touched the top of Marcus, his head. Where it touched, he felt a strange tingling sensation, like electricity running through his skull. Don't worry, the voices said. The conversion doesn't hurt much. And afterward, you will be part of something beautiful, something eternal. Marcus felt his limbs beginning to stiffen, not with fear, but with actual rigidity, as if his bones were transforming into wood grain by grain. He looked down at his hands. The skin was taking on a wooden texture, complete with realistic bark patterns. His fingers were elongating, becoming more articulated. Better for fine motor control? You were going to help us expand, the creature explained. There are so many people in the cities who make too much noise. Cars, music, construction. All that horrible noise that disrupts the peace of the forest. Marcus tried to speak, but his jaw had already been fitted with hinges. When he opened his mouth, only a clicking sound emerged. Soon, you'll help us visit those noisy places. Shopping malls, concert venues, anywhere people gather to make chaos. I'll show them how much better life is when you move in perfect harmony. The creature's hand moved to Marcus' chest, and he felt his ribs separating as a hollow cavity was carved out of his torso. Into this space, the creature placed a collection of woodworking tools, each one perfectly sized for human hands. "You make beautiful puppets," the voices promised. "And when you redone, those puppets will make more puppets. Soon, the whole world will be quiet and peaceful." Marcus wanted to resist, but the wooden transformation was bringing an unexpected calm. The constant anxiety that had driven him to chase YouTube fame was fading. The need for validation, for views and likes and subscribers, seemed suddenly meaningless. Why had he spent so much time making noise when silence was so much more beautiful? His camera fell from his newly articulated wooden fingers. The screen cracked against a rock, but kept recording. Through the broken display, Marcus watched his own face transform. His features became more symmetrical, more perfect, carved by a master craftsman who had been practicing for decades. When the conversion was complete, Marcus stood up smoothly. His movements were precise and graceful in a way they had never been when he was fully human. The creature smiled with his voice as Marcus spoke for the first time as a puppet. "Where shall we go first?" Marcus asked, his words joining the chorus. "There's a music festival in Calgary next week," the creature replied through all of its voices. "Thousands of people making noise together. It will be perfect for the collection." Marcus nodded, understanding his purpose now. He was a scout, a recruiter. His job was to find the loudest, most chaotic places and bring the gift of wooden peace to everyone there. The puppet army began marching toward the road, moving in perfect synchronization. Marcus took his place at the front, his new body feeling more natural with each step. Behind them, the bunker entrance sealed itself with a grinding of ancient machinery. Inside, thousands of wooden dolls waited for their turn to serve. The failed experiments, the prototypes, the ones who hadn't quite worked out right. But Marcus was different. Marcus was perfect. As they reached the highway, Marcus felt a moment of his old consciousness surface. A flash of horror at what he had become. Then the feeling passed, replaced by the warm satisfaction of purpose. He had work to do, noise to eliminate, peace to spread. His phone, forgotten in the forest, continued recording until the battery died. The last image it captured was of the Sasquatch disappearing back into the trees, its string-covered form blending seamlessly with the shadows. The video would never be uploaded to YouTube, but that was probably for the best. After all, the internet was such a noisy place. 3 weeks later, the Calgary Music Festival made international news. Not for the music, but for the mysterious mass disappearance of over 3,000 attendees. Security footage showed the crowd suddenly stopping mid-dance, their movements becoming synchronized and mechanical. Then they simply walked away, moving in perfect formation toward the forest. Search teams found no trace of them, just wooden dolls scattered throughout the festival grounds, each one carved with incredible detail and craftsmanship. The dolls all wore the same expression, a peaceful smile that somehow managed to look both serene and terrifying. Local authorities blamed a gas leak for causing mass hallucinations. The official report suggested the missing people had wandered into the wilderness in a confused state and would eventually be found. But people who lived near the forest started reporting strange sounds at night. Not the chaotic noise of modern life, but something much more unsettling. The sound of thousands of footsteps moving in perfect unison through the trees. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, they could hear voices singing in harmony. A beautiful, wordless song that made listeners want to walk into the forest and join the choir. The noise of the world was slowly being replaced by something quieter. Something wooden. Something that never complained about anything ever again. Story 5. Blackstone Military Radar. A signal from hell. The gunshots echoed across the frozen Saskatchewan prairie like thunder from hell itself. Lieutenant Jake Morrison pressed himself against the concrete bunker wall, his breath coming out in white puffs that froze before they hit the ground. 3 hours ago, he'd been investigating reports of strange radio interference for his conspiracy theory podcast. Now he was watching Canadian soldiers shoot at their own shadows while screaming about something being inside them. The Blackstone radar station had been abandoned since 1987. Officially, but the massive dish still turned slowly against the winter sky, tracking something that wasn't supposed to exist. Morrison had spent 5 years chasing military cover-ups for his YouTube channel. Stories about secret experiments, supernatural weapons tests, government conspiracies that made American horror movies look tame. He investigated everything from Skinwalker Ranch to abandoned missile silos in Montana. Nothing had prepared him for this. A soldier stumbled past his hiding spot, rifle raised and firing at the shadows stretching out behind him on the snow. The man, face was twisted with terror and rage, his eyes reflecting the radar dish, his pulsing red light. "She is inside me," the soldier screamed between shots. "Get her out! Get her out!" The shadow didn't react to the bullets. It couldn't. But the soldier kept firing until his magazine ran empty, then tried to reload with hands that shook so badly he dropped the ammunition in the snow. Morrison had arrived at Blackstone 3 hours before sunset, following leads from a conspiracy forum dedicated to Canadian military secrets. A trucker claimed he'd seen lights moving around the supposedly dead facility. Locals in the nearest town whispered about radio signals that made people violent. The kind of creepypasta material that drove his subscriber count through the roof. He expected to find nothing. Maybe some squatters or scrap metal thieves. Instead, he discovered that Blackstone was still operational. The radar dish swept back and forth across the sky, following coordinates that seemed to make no mathematical sense. And every time it completed a rotation, the red warning lights pulsed once. That is when the screaming had started. Morrison counted at least 12 soldiers scattered across the base, all Canadian military by their uniforms. They moved like sleepwalkers, stumbling through the snow-covered compound while firing at shadows that followed them wherever they went. Not metaphorical shadows, actual shadows, dark silhouettes that stretched and twisted independently of their owners, sometimes reaching toward other people with grasping finger shapes. The supernatural element should have excited Morrison. This was exactly the kind of content his audience craved. Military secrets mixed with genuine paranormal activity. The holy grail of conspiracy theorists. But watching grown soldiers weep while emptying clips at their own shadows was too horrifying for entertainment value. Morrison checked his phone. No signal. The radar was putting out some kind of interference that killed all electronic communication. His camera was still recording, but the footage would be useless if he couldn't upload it. A hand grabbed his shoulder. Morrison spun around, expecting to face another crazed soldier. Instead, he found himself looking at a woman in civilian clothes. She was maybe 40 years old, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years of prairie winters. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, glancing nervously at the radar dish. The signal was getting stronger. "Who are you?" Morrison asked. "Dr. Sarah Chen. I used to work here." Before they shut it down, she pulled him deeper into the shadows of the bunker, before they discovered what it was really picking up. Morrison, as conspiracy theory instincts kicked into high gear. A former employee with inside knowledge was every investigative journalist's dream. "What kind of signal?" he pressed. Dr. Chen looked at the soldiers stumbling through the compound. One had given up shooting and was now clawing at his own shadow with his bare hands, trying to tear it away from his body. "We thought we were tracking Soviet satellites," she said. "Cold War stuff. Standard military radar operations. But the signal we found wasn't coming from Earth. The classic setup for every military conspiracy story. Secret space programs, alien contact, government cover-ups." Morrison had heard variations of this tale 100 times. But the soldiers screaming in the distance made it feel different. More real. "The signal comes from somewhere else," Dr. Chen continued. "Somewhere that doesn't follow our rules about physics or biology or sanity. And it's not just a signal. It is an invitation." A soldier appeared around the corner of the bunker, rifle trained on them. But his eyes were focused on something behind Morrison. Something that wasn't there. "She is spreading," the soldier muttered. "Through the shadows, through the connections. She is going to be in all of us soon." Morrison looked down. His own shadow stretched across the snow. Normal and unremarkable. But as he watched, it seemed to shift slightly, as if something was moving inside the dark silhouette. "Don't look at it directly," Dr. Chen warned. "That makes it stronger." Too late. Morrison was already staring at his shadow, watching it writhe and twist like a living thing. The shape was still roughly human, but the proportions were wrong. The arms too long, the head tilted at an impossible angle. And there was something else. A second figure overlapping his shadow. A woman, silhouette with hair that moved like it was underwater. Morrison felt a presence press against the inside of his skull. Not painful, but invasive. Like someone rifling through his thoughts without permission. Images flashed through his mind. Memories that weren't his own. A woman falling from a great height. The radar dish tracking her descent through dimensions that had no names. Her impact was something that existed between reality and void. Her name was Lieutenant Rebecca Stone, Dr. Chen said, as if reading his thoughts. She was our communications officer, the first person to make direct contact with the signal. Morrison tried to look away from his shadow, but couldn't. The presence in his head was growing stronger, more insistent. What happened to her? He managed to ask. She became part of it, part of the signal. Now she is trying to come back through anyone who receives the transmission. The shadow woman in Morrison's silhouette turned her head toward him. Even though she had no features, he could feel her looking directly at him. She wants to use our bodies as anchor points, Dr. Chen explained. Ways to exist in our dimension, but human minds aren't designed to hold something from outside reality. That is why the soldiers are going crazy. Morrison understood now why the base had been abandoned. Not because of budget cuts or political changes, but because they made contact with something that shouldn't exist. Why is the radar still running? He asked. Someone turned it back on 3 days ago. Started broadcasting the invitation signal again. Dr. Chen. His voice was grim. We think it was the Americans. Of course it was. Morrison had investigated enough military conspiracy theories to know how these things worked. Some black budget program had decided to weaponize whatever they found at Blackstone. Turn it into a psychological warfare tool. They probably thought they could control it, Dr. Chen continued. Use it against enemy forces. Make soldiers turn on each other without firing a shot. But they miscalculated. The signal didn't distinguish between friend and enemy. It infected anyone within range, turning them into potential hosts for something that wanted desperately to exist in the physical world. Morrison felt the presence in his head growing stronger. Rebecca Stone was learning to navigate his memories, his personality, his fears. Soon she would know him well enough to wear his identity like a costume. How do we stop it? He asked. Dr. Chen pointed toward the radar dish. The transmission equipment is in the control bunker. If we can shut down the signal, she'll lose her connection to our dimension. Morrison looked at the soldiers scattered across the compound. Getting to the control bunker would mean crossing open ground while armed men shot at hallucinations. There's another problem, Dr. Chen added. The longer the signal runs, the stronger her influence becomes. She is not just possessing people anymore. She is learning to control their shadows directly. As if to demonstrate her point, one of the soldiers' shadows detached itself from his body and began moving independently. The dark silhouette walked toward another soldier, then merged with his shadow. The second soldier immediately stopped shooting and turned his weapon on himself. Morrison watched in horror as the man pressed the rifle barrel under his chin. The shadow possession was spreading from person to person, turning them into a collective organism controlled by something from beyond reality. We have to move now, Dr. Chen said, before she figures out how to use the shadows as weapons. They ran toward the control bunker, keeping to the darkest areas where their shadows would be less visible. Behind them, Morrison could hear more gunshots as soldiers continued their futile battle against the dark silhouettes that followed them everywhere. The control bunker was a concrete cube built into the side of a hill. The heavy steel door stood open, revealing banks of electronic equipment that hummed with malevolent energy. Inside, the radar's control systems filled an entire wall. Dozens of monitors showed tracking data, signal strength readings, and what looked like attempts to decode the transmission from beyond. But it was the main screen that made Morrison's blood freeze. The display showed a real-time view of the compound from above, but instead of showing the soldiers and buildings, it revealed the shadows. Every dark silhouette cast by every person and object, rendered in perfect detail. And in each shadow, Morrison could see her, Rebecca Stone, overlapping with every dark shape like a photographic double exposure. She was inside all of them simultaneously, learning from each host while maintaining her connection to the others. She is building a network, Dr. Chen whispered, using the shadows as connection points. Soon they'll all be able to control everyone at once. Morrison approached the control panel, looking for an obvious shutdown switch. But the equipment was military-grade and far more complex than anything he encountered in his conspiracy investigations. Do you know how to turn it off? He asked. Dr. Chen was staring at the main screen with growing alarm. Look at the shadow count, she said. Morrison looked. The display showed 847 active shadow connections, far more than the dozen soldiers he'd seen outside. She is not just affecting the people here, Dr. Chen realized. The signal's range is expanding. She is reaching people in the nearby towns. Morrison thought about the trucker who first reported the lights at Blackstone, about the locals who They mentioned radio interference. How many people were already infected? He grabbed the most obvious-looking power switch and yanked it down. Nothing happened. The equipment continued humming, and the shadow count kept climbing. It won. They shut down from here, Dr. Chen said. The power source is hardened against interference. Do you have to physically destroy the radar dish itself? Morrison looked through the bunker's window at the massive dish rotating slowly against the star-filled sky. It was at least 50 feet across and mounted on a tower that put it 30 feet off the ground. How? He asked. Explosives. There should be demolition charges in the armory bunker. They left the control room and headed toward the armory, moving carefully through the compound. The soldiers had stopped shooting at their shadows and were now standing motionless in the snow. Their dark silhouettes moved independently, reaching toward each other like fingers trying to touch. The shadow network was growing stronger. Morrison felt Rebecca Stone's presence in his mind becoming more insistent. She was learning his language, his memories, his identity. Soon she would be able to speak through him. The armory bunker was locked, but Dr. Chen produced a key card that still worked despite the years since the base disabandonment. I kept it as a souvenir, she explained. Never thought I'd need it again. Inside, they found crates of military-grade explosives, C4 charges designed for demolition work. Morrison had seen enough action movies to know the basics of how they worked. How much do we need? He asked. All of it, Dr. Chen replied. That dish was built to survive nuclear attacks. We need to completely obliterate it. They loaded the explosives into a military transport vehicle and drove toward the radar tower. The soldiers didn't react as they passed, too focused on their internal battle with the shadow entity trying to possess them. At the base of the tower, Morrison began placing charges around the support struts while Dr. Chen rigged the detonator. The work was slow and careful. One mistake would kill them both and leave Rebecca Stone free to expand her influence. As they worked, Morrison could feel her presence growing stronger in his mind. She was almost ready to take full control. Soon she would be able to speak through him, act through him, use his body as a gateway into the physical world. Hurry, he told Dr. Chen. I don't think I can hold her off much longer. Dr. Chen finished with the detonator and stepped back. We need to get at least 100 yards away before we trigger this. They ran toward the perimeter fence, but Morrison could feel his legs becoming sluggish. Rebecca Stone was fighting for control of his motor functions. 50 yards from the tower, Morrison collapsed. His shadow had become completely independent, moving and gesturing while his body lay motionless in the snow. She is taking over, he gasped. Dr. Chen knelt beside him, the detonator in her hand. Fight her? You have to fight her. Morrison tried, but Rebecca Stone's influence was too strong. She had learned enough about his mind to override his conscious control. His body stood up without his permission. When he spoke, it was with her voice. You cannot stop the signal, Rebecca Stone said through Morrison's mouth. I have already spread to thousands of people. Soon I will have an army of shadows. Dr. Chen backed away, her finger hovering over the detonator trigger. The radar dish is just the beginning, Stone continued. There are other transmission points, other ways to bridge the gap between dimensions. You can destroy this one, but you cannot destroy them all. Morrison fought desperately to regain control of his own body. In his mind, he could see Stone, his true form. Not the shadowy silhouette that appeared in dark reflections, but her original self. A woman driven mad by contact with something beyond human comprehension. She is lying, Morrison managed to say through Stone's influence. This is the only transmission point. Destroy it now, Dr. Chen hesitated. Her finger on the trigger. If I detonate while you were this close, I'll die, she said. Better than letting her spread to more people, Morrison replied, fighting to keep control of his voice. Stone's influence surged back, forcing Morrison's body to take a step toward Dr. Chen. Give me the detonator, Stone commanded. I will show you wonders beyond your imagination. Realities where the laws of physics bend to accommodate true power. Morrison could see the temptation in Dr. Chen's eyes. The offer of knowledge, of understanding, of contact with something genuinely otherworldly. It was the same temptation that had driven him to investigate conspiracy theories. The desire to uncover hidden truths. To be among the few who really understood how the world worked. But some truths were too dangerous to know. Don, listen to her, Morrison said. She is not offering knowledge. She is offering slavery. Dr. Chen looked at the detonator, then at Morrison, then at the radar dish continuing its slow rotation against the sky. I'm sorry, she whispered. She pressed the trigger. The explosion lit up the prairie like a miniature sun. The radar dish disintegrated in a shower of metal fragments that rained down across the compound. Morrison felt Rebecca Stone's presence disappear from his mind like a radio station suddenly going off the air. Around the compound, the soldiers collapsed as their shadows returned to normal. But the silence that followed wasn't too peaceful. It was expectant, as if something was waiting. Dr. Chen helped Morrison to his feet. Both of them were battered by the explosion, this shockwave, but alive. Is it over? Morrison asked. Dr. Chen looked at the smoking wreckage of the radar tower. For now, but she was right about one thing. This one, to be the last transmission point. There are people in government who think they can weaponize contact with other dimensions. Morrison thought about his YouTube channel, his conspiracy theory investigations, his audience of thousands who craved hidden truths and government secrets. I have to tell people about this, he said. They want to believe you, and if they do, they'll want to investigate for themselves. Do you want to be responsible for leading more people to the next Blackstone? It was a question that would haunt Morrison for the rest of his life. The responsibility of knowledge, the price of truth. They walked back toward Morrison, his vehicle, in silence. Around them, the Canadian soldiers were beginning to wake up, confused and traumatized but free from Rebecca Stone's influence. For now, as they reached the car, Morrison noticed something that made his heart skip. His shadow was normal, but Dr. Chen's shadow had a second figure overlapping it. A woman, a silhouette with long hair that moved like it was underwater. Dr. Chen noticed his stare and looked down at her own shadow. When she saw the additional figure, she didn't seem surprised. She needed a way to survive the signal. This destruction, Dr. Chen said calmly. Someone who understood the technology. Someone who could help her find the next transmission point. Morrison backed away, but Dr. Chen made no move to follow. Don't worry, she said. I want to hurt you. Rebecca and I have an understanding. She gets to continue existing, and I get to learn things about reality that no human has ever known. You letting her possess you? I am forming a partnership. She is not evil, just desperate to exist in our dimension. With my help, she can find less traumatic ways to make contact. Morrison got in his car and drove away as fast as the winter roads would allow. In his rearview mirror, he could see Dr. Chen standing motionless in the snow, her shadow moving independently beside her. 3 months later, Morrison received an email from an encrypted address. The message contained coordinates for a location in northern Alaska and a single line of text. The next signal goes live tomorrow. Come if you want the real story. Morrison stared at the message for a long time. His YouTube channel had exploded in popularity after he posted a heavily edited version of the Blackstone incident. His audience was hungry for more content, more secrets, more contact with the supernatural forces that supposedly controlled the world. He could go to Alaska, document whatever was happening there, build his subscriber count even higher, or he could delete the message and pretend he never received it. Morrison looked at his shadow on the wall. It was perfectly normal. No additional figures, no independent movement. But sometimes, late at night when he was editing videos, he could swear he saw something moving in the darkness at the edge of his vision. Something that looked like a woman with long hair that moved like it was underwater. Rebecca Stone was still out there, spreading from shadow to shadow, building her network one person at a time. And she was learning to be patient. Story 6. Deadly Quest in the White Otter Castle. The live stream cut to static at 11:47 p.m. Just as Maya's scream echoed through the castle, the stone halls. Her phone clattered to the floor, camera still recording as footsteps ran toward something that shouldn't exist. Detective Sarah Collins watched the footage for the 100th time, trying to make sense of what had happened to the 5 social media influencers who vanished at White Otter Castle 3 days ago. The isolated fortress in northern Ontario had claimed another group of thrill seekers, just like it had been doing for over a century. But this time, they recorded everything. Collins had seen her share of missing persons cases, but nothing like this. The victims weren't random hikers or drunk teenagers. They were professional content creators with millions of followers, filming what they called a cute quest through Canada, this most haunted castle. The irony wasn't lost on her. They'd come looking for supernatural horror to boost their subscriber counts. Instead, they They found something that made every American creepypasta story look like a bedtime tale. She clicked play on Maya Chen's final video. The footage showed 5 young people entering White Otter Castle's main hall, their phone cameras capturing every detail in crisp high definition. The castle had been built in 1903 by Jimmy McCoat, a hermit who spent 14 years constructing his dream fortress on a remote island in Turtle Lake. McCoat had died alone in his creation, and locals claimed his spirit still wandered the halls, searching for the companionship he never found in life. Perfect material for ghost hunters and social media personalities. "What is up, Maya Squad?" Maya's voice was bright and energetic as she addressed her phone camera. We're about to explore the creepiest castle in Canada. This place is supposed to be seriously haunted, so smash that like button if you want to see some real supernatural activity. The other 4 influencers introduced themselves to their respective audiences. Jake Morrison, the urban explorer with 2 million YouTube subscribers. Emma Rodriguez, whose TikTok ghost hunting videos had made her famous. David Kim, a photographer who specialized in abandoned places. And Lisa Park, whose Instagram account featured her visiting supposedly cursed locations around the world. They coordinated their visit to create cross-platform content, each filming from different angles to capture the complete experience. The plan was simple. Spend one night in the castle, document any paranormal activity, and create viral content that would boost all their follower counts. Collins fast-forwarded through the early footage. The first few hours showed typical influencer behavior, staged scares, exaggerated reactions, and constant commentary for their audiences. The castle itself looked exactly as she expected from the historical photos. Stone walls, wooden floors, and a grand staircase leading to the upper levels. But at 9:23 p.m., something changed. Emma was filming in the main hall when she noticed the owl statue. It stood on a pedestal near the fireplace, carved from white stone with eyes that seemed to follow the camera. Emma approached it, narrating for her TikTok audience. "Check out this creepy owl, guys." Jimmy McCoat was obsessed with owls. He carved dozens of them throughout the castle. But this one feels different. Like it was watching us. The statue was beautiful in a disturbing way. Nearly 4 feet tall, with wings spread as if ready to take flight. The detail was incredible, from individual feathers to the predatory curve of its beak. Emma reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers made contact with the stone, every phone in the castle started glitching. The video feeds became distorted, showing impossible angles and rooms that couldn't exist within the castle's known layout. Collins paused the footage and rubbed her eyes. She'd been a cop for 15 years, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this case. The video evidence was clear, but it documented things that violated every law of physics. She resumed playback. After Emma touched the owl statue, the castle's interior began changing. Subtly at first, doorways appeared where solid walls had been moments before. Hallways stretched longer than the building's actual dimensions. Rooms rearranged themselves when nobody was looking directly at them. The influencers noticed the changes gradually. Jake was the first to comment, confusion creeping into his usually confident voice. "Guys, wasn't there a door here before? I could have sworn this wall was solid when we came through earlier." Maya tried to dismiss it as confusion in an unfamiliar building, but her camera had captured the truth. The castle was reshaping itself around them, creating a maze that defied architectural logic. Collins switched to David's camera feed. His photographer's eye had caught details the others missed. In his footage, she could see the owl statue moving. Not dramatically, but in tiny increments when nobody was looking directly at it. A slight turn of the head, a subtle shift in wing position. The statue was tracking the group's movements, following them with stone eyes that shouldn't have been able to see. At 10:15 p.m., Lisa discovered they were trapped. She tried to leave through the main entrance, only to find herself back in the central hall after walking through what should have been the exit corridor. The castle had become a closed loop, with every path leading back to the starting point. "This is impossible," she whispered to her Instagram livestream. They mapped every step. The exit should be right here. But the hallway just keeps going in circles." The comments on her stream were going wild. Thousands of viewers were watching in real time as the influencers became genuinely terrified. What had started as manufactured content for social media was becoming something much more sinister. Emma tried calling for help, but their phones had no signal despite the cellular tower visible through the windows. They were cut off from the outside world, trapped in a building that obeyed its own rules. Collins checked the timeline. This was where the real horror began. At 10:47 p.m., Jake's camera captured something that made Collins' blood run cold. He was filming the owl statue when it turned its head to look directly at him. Not the subtle movements from before, but a complete 90-degree rotation that no stone carving should have been able to make. Jake stumbled backward, his camera shaking as he tried to process what he'd seen. "Did you guys see that? Please tell me someone else saw that." But the others were scattered throughout the castle, each dealing with their own impossible situations. Maya had found a room that wasn't there before, filled with dozens of smaller owl carvings that seemed to watch her every move. Emma was in a hallway that stretched infinitely in both directions, with doors that opened onto the same room no matter which one she chose. David was documenting the architectural impossibilities, his professional eye trying to make sense of rooms that were bigger on the inside than the outside. His photographs showed angles that hurt to look at, geometric arrangements that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Lisa had found the castle, this library, where books wrote themselves as she watched. Page after page filled with cramped handwriting that detailed the loneliness and obsession of Jimmy McCoat's final years. Collins paused the video again. The psychological profile she read described McCoat as a brilliant but disturbed individual. He retreated from society to build his dream castle. He died alone, found weeks later by hunters who noticed smoke from his chimney had stopped. But the books in Lisa's footage told a different story. They described McCoat's attempts to create artificial companions, his experiments with stone and wood, and his growing belief that inanimate objects could be given life through sheer force of will and loneliness. The owl statue wasn't just a carving. It was McCoat's masterpiece, his attempt to create a friend who would never leave him. Collins resumed the footage. At 11:30 p.m., the influencers realized they weren't alone in the castle. Maya's camera caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision. Shadows that moved independently of their owners. Reflections in windows that showed figures standing behind her when nobody was there. Jake's urban exploration experience kicked in, and he started treating the situation like a serious survival scenario. He gathered the others in the main hall, using their phone lights to create a circle of illumination around the owl statue. "We need to stick together," he told his camera. "Something is seriously wrong here. This isn't just paranormal activity. The building itself is hostile." Emma was live streaming to her TikTok audience, the comments scrolling so fast they were unreadable. Thousands of people were watching 5 influencers trapped in an impossible situation, unable to help or intervene. The modern horror of social media isolation, watched by millions, but utterly alone. At 11:40 p.m., David made the connection that sealed their fate. He'd been studying the architectural changes, trying to map the castle's shifting layout. His photographer, his training had taught him to notice patterns, and he found one that chilled him to the bone. "The castle isn't just changing randomly," he told his camera. "It's learning from us. Every time we try to find an exit, it adapts. It's like a maze that solves itself to keep us trapped." Collins had read about adaptive architecture in science fiction, but seeing it documented in real-time footage was terrifying. The castle had become a living entity, using McCoat's obsession with companionship to trap visitors and keep them forever. Lisa's Instagram stream showed her finding more of McCoat's writings. His final entries described his success in animating the owl statue, his joy at finally having a friend who would listen to his stories and share his solitude. But McCoat's idea of companionship was possessive and controlling. He wanted friends who could never leave, never grow bored, never abandon him like everyone else in his life had done. The castle had become his web, and the owl statue was the spider at its center. At 11:45 p.m., the statue moved again. This time, all 5 cameras caught it simultaneously. The owl stepped down from its pedestal with fluid grace, stone feathers ruffling as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist. Maya screamed and ran toward what she thought was an exit. Her camera bounced wildly as she fled, showing glimpses of hallways that twisted and turned like living things. Jake tried to follow her, but the floor beneath his feet shifted, sending him tumbling down a staircase that hadn't existed moments before. Emma's TikTok livestream captured her final moments as the owl statue spread its wings and took flight. Stone shouldn't have been able to fly, but the rules of physics had been suspended inside McCoet's domain. David's camera showed the owl landing in front of him, its stone eyes reflecting his phone's light. When it spoke, its voice was Jimmy McCoet, preserved in stone for over a century. "Stay with me," the owl pleaded. "I've been so lonely, so very lonely, but now I have friends again. Friends who can never leave." Lisa's Instagram feed went dark as something wrapped around her phone. Her followers watched helplessly as her camera was dragged through the castle, shifting corridors toward an unknown fate. The final footage came from Maya's phone, dropped during her desperate flight. The camera lay on its side, showing a sideways view of the main hall as the owl statue returned to its pedestal. But now there were 6 statues arranged around the room, 5 new carvings that looked remarkably like the missing influencers, their stone faces frozen in expressions of terror and resignation. The live stream ended at 11:47 p.m., leaving millions of viewers staring at static screens. Collins closed her laptop and looked out the window at Turtle Lake. White Otter Castle sat on its island like a stone tumor, waiting for the next group of visitors to stumble into McCoet's trap. The case was officially classified as missing persons, but Collins knew the truth. The influencers weren't missing. They were exactly where Jimmy McCoet wanted them. Forever, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message contained coordinates for White Otter Castle and a single line of text: "Come alone. My friends are waiting to meet you." Collins stared at the message for a long time. She could delete it, file the case as unsolved, and pretend she'd never seen the footage. Or she could take a boat to the island and investigate in person. Her rational mind screamed that it was a trap, but her cop instincts demanded she follow every lead, no matter how dangerous. Collins looked at her reflection in the phone, this black screen. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw stone feathers behind her. She deleted the message and drove home, but the coordinates were already burned into her memory. Some invitations were impossible to refuse, no matter how much you wanted to. Story 7. Cemetery of Trademarks. A place where cars live. The engine turned over at 5:47 a.m. Jake Martinez knew because he'd been staring at his phone for the past 3 hours, waiting for dawn to break over the Alberta forest. The sound came from somewhere deep in the car graveyard ahead of them. A low rumble that shouldn't exist in a place where everything had been dead for decades. "You hear that?" Jake whispered to his partner, Tommy Chen. They'd driven 12 hours from Detroit for this American horror story. Metal hunters always chase the supernatural, but this place felt different. "Wrong." Tommy nodded, his metal detector trembling in his grip. "Sounds like a V8, big block, but that is impossible." The cemetery of trademarks stretched before them like something from a creepypasta forum. Hundreds of rusted cars sat frozen between the pine trees, their hoods buried under decades of Alberta snow and moss. Ford Mustangs, Chevy Impalas, Cadillac Eldorados, all abandoned in the 1960s when the mining town went bust. The locals called it cursed, said the cars came alive when nobody was watching. Jake had laughed at those stories back in Detroit. Now, standing at the edge of this automotive graveyard, the laughter felt far away. Another engine coughed to life somewhere in the maze of metal. Then another, the forest filled with the ghost sounds of carburetors and pistons that shouldn't work anymore. "We should go back," Tommy said. His breath came out in white puffs. October in Alberta felt like December anywhere else. "Not yet." Jake pulled out his phone and started recording. His YouTube channel needed content, and this place screamed viral video. Think about it. Real supernatural activity. Documented ghost cars. This could be huge. They walked deeper into the cemetery. Rust flaked off door handles like dried blood. Spider webs connected steering wheels to rearview mirrors. Every car told a story of abandonment, of lives interrupted. The Mercedes sat alone in a clearing 50 yards ahead. Even from a distance, Jake could see the chains. Thick logging chains wrapped around the trunk of a massive pine tree. The other end disappeared under the car's front bumper. Someone had chained this vehicle to prevent it from leaving. 1959 Mercedes 220S. Tommy breathed. Jesus Christ, that's worth 40 grand easy. Why would someone chain it up? The car looked perfect, too perfect. While every other vehicle in the cemetery wore decades of decay, this Mercedes gleamed like it had just rolled off a showroom floor. The chrome bumpers reflected the morning sun. The leather seats looked soft enough to sleep on. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his girlfriend. "Where are you? You said you'd be back yesterday." He ignored it. This was bigger than a relationship. This was the kind of scary content that made YouTube careers. They approached the Mercedes slowly. The chains weren't rusty. That was the first red flag. Everything else in this place had surrendered to time, but these chains looked brand new. Industrial strength, the kind used to tow semi-trucks. Look at the license plate, Tommy whispered. Alberta plates from 1959. But the registration sticker looked fresh. Current. Impossible. Jake reached for the driver's door handle. The metal felt warm under his fingers. Not sun warm, body warm, like someone had been sitting inside moments ago. The door opened with a soft click. The interior smelled like leather and aftershave. Old Spice, the kind his grandfather used to wear. The dashboard showed no cracks. The radio knobs gleamed. Even the floor mats looked factory fresh. This is insane, Jake muttered, sliding into the driver's seat. It's like time stopped inside this car. The key sat in the ignition. A simple metal key attached to a keychain with a tiny Canadian maple leaf. Jake, his hand moved toward it almost automatically. Don, Tommy said from outside the car. Don, you dare turn that key. But Jake was already reaching. His fingers wrapped around the key before his brain could stop them. The metal felt ice cold despite the warm interior. He turned it. The engine purred to life immediately. Smooth as silk, the gas gauge showed full. The speedometer lit up like Christmas morning. Even the radio crackled with static, searching for a station that no longer existed. That is when Jake noticed the cassette player. A tape sat in the deck. Homemade. No label. Just a piece of masking tape with handwriting in black ink. The words were barely readable. My last words. October 13th, 1959. Today was October 13th. Jake, get out of there. Tommy, his voice sounded far away. Something's wrong. The other cars, they were all starting up. Jake looked around the cemetery. Headlights flickered on throughout the forest. Dozens of them. The sound of engines filled the air like a mechanical symphony. But there were no drivers. No people anywhere. His thumb found the play button on the cassette deck. A man's voice filled the car. Shaky, terrified, speaking with a Canadian accent from 60 years ago. My name is Robert Harrison. If someone finds this tape, you need to know the truth about this place. About what happened here. About why I had to chain my car to this tree. The voice paused. In the background, Jake could hear other engines running. The same sounds filling the forest right now. The cars in this cemetery aren't abandoned. They retrapped. The mining company didn't just dig for copper here. They dug too deep, found something that shouldn't exist. Something that gets inside machines. Makes them alive. Hungry. Jake, his hands started shaking. He tried to turn off the cassette, but the button wouldn't respond. I worked for the mining company. I saw what happened to the first cars that came here. They started moving on their own. Driving themselves. Hunting. The company tried to cover it up. Said it was an electrical problem. But electrical problems done. T explained teeth marks on the steering wheels. Don. T explained the screaming that came from inside the engines. Around the Mercedes, the other cars began to move. Not driving. Sliding. Scraping across the forest floor toward the clearing. Their headlights created a circle of light around Jake and Tommy. The company decided to abandon the mine. Leave everything here. But the cars followed the workers back to town. 7 people died before we figured out how to stop them. We had to chain them down. Trap them here. Keep them hungry. Jake tried to open the driver's door. It wouldn't budge. The handle moved, but the door stayed locked. He looked at Tommy through the windshield. His partner was backing away from the approaching cars, his metal detector forgotten in the pine needles. But chaining them wasn't enough. The voice on the tape continued. Someone has to stay. Someone has to feed them. Every few years, someone comes looking for scrap metal, looking for treasure. The cars wake up. They need fresh blood to keep sleeping. The Mercedes lurched forward. The chains went tight with a metallic shriek that echoed through the forest. The car strained against its bonds like a wild animal trying to break free. I volunteered to stay, to be the bait. My car is chained to this tree, but I am not. When treasure hunters come, I hide in the forest. I watch. I wait. And when they get curious enough to start one of the engines, I make sure they leave. Jake pounded on the windows. The glass wouldn't break. Outside, Tommy was running toward the forest edge, but the other cars were cutting off his escape routes. Their engines growled with mechanical hunger. The cars feed on fear first, then blood, then they sleep for a few more years. It is not a perfect system, but it keeps them contained. Keeps them from spreading to the cities. The cassette player clicked. The tape had reached the end. But instead of stopping, It rewound itself. Started playing from the beginning. Jake felt something cold touch his neck. He spun around in the driver's seat. A man sat in the back seat. Pale skin, 1950s clothes, the same face from the driver's license registration Jake had glimpsed in the glove compartment. Robert Harrison smiled. He looked exactly the same as he had in 1959. "Thanks for coming," Robert said. His voice matched the one on the tape perfectly. "I was getting lonely. 60 years is a long time to wait between meals." The other cars in the cemetery had surrounded Tommy. Their doors were opening by themselves. Empty driver's seats waited like hungry mouths. Jake tried one more time to break the window. His fist bounced off the glass like it was made of steel. "Don, fight it," Robert said. "The cars, Don, they like it when people fight. Makes the feeding messier." The Mercedes engine revved higher. The chain stretched but held. Jake could smell burning rubber. Feel the car, its desperate need to chase, to hunt. "Why are you doing this?" Jake asked. Robert, his smile never wavered. "Someone has to keep them fed. Keep them happy. The alternative is worse. Trust me." Through the windshield, Jake watched Tommy disappear into one of the Cadillacs. The door closed with a final thump. The car, its headlights flashed once, then went dark. "Your friend will make good food for the El Dorado," Robert said. "It hasn't eaten since 2018. Some urban explorers from Minnesota. Nice kids. Very nutritious." The Mercedes stopped straining against the chains. The engine settled into a contented purr. Jake felt the car, his hunger satisfied. "For now, what happens to me?" Jake whispered. Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out a small cassette recorder. The same model from the 1950s. He handed it to Jake along with a blank tape. "You get to make a recording for the next treasure hunters. The next metal detectors who come looking for easy money." Robert, his smile grew wider. "Welcome to the Cemetery of Trademarks, Jake. Hope you like it here, because you were never leaving." Jake took the recorder with trembling hands. Outside, the other cars were returning to their positions throughout the forest. Going back to sleep, waiting for the next visitors. He pressed record and tried to think of what to say. How to warn the next people. How to explain what this place really was. But looking at Robert, his unchanging smile, Jake realized the truth. The warnings weren't meant to keep people away. They were meant to draw them in, to make them curious, to make them start the engines. The cars needed to feed, and the recordings were just bait. Jake cleared his throat and began to speak into the recorder. His voice shook with terror, but he knew that would only make it more convincing. More likely to lure the next metal hunters into the forest. "My name is Jake Martinez. If someone finds this tape, you need to know the truth about this place." Behind him, Robert Harrison nodded approvingly. 60 years of practice had taught him exactly what worked. The Mercedes settled deeper into the forest floor, content and full. Around them, the other cars dreamed their mechanical dreams, dreaming of highways and chases and the taste of human fear. And somewhere in Detroit, Jake's girlfriend was still waiting for a text that would never come. The Cemetery of Trademarks had claimed another caretaker, another voice to lure fresh prey into the hungry darkness between the trees. The cassette recorder kept spinning, preserving Jake's last words for whoever would find them next. In the distance, an engine turned over. Waiting. Story 8. Faithful Friend Pet Cemetery. The scratching at the bedroom window stopped when Jessica looked directly at the security monitor. But the image remained. Her golden retriever Max stood in the backyard, tail wagging, looking up at her second-floor window. The same Max she buried 3 months ago at Faithful Friend Pet Cemetery in Quebec. The same Max whose eye sockets were now black holes that somehow still seemed to see everything. Jessica, his hands shook as she rewound the footage. There it was again, Max appearing at 3:17 a.m., just like every night since her visit to the cemetery. Standing perfectly still under her window, waiting. She thought the scratching sounds were tree branches, wind, anything but the truth her security system was showing her. The supernatural horror had started innocently enough. A weekend trip to Montreal with her boyfriend Dave. Their golden retriever Max had been hit by a car 2 weeks earlier, and Jessica was still wrecking over the guilt. She left the gate open. She'd been distracted by her phone. Max had run into the street chasing a squirrel and never made it back home. Dave suggested they visit Max's grave on their way through Quebec. Closure, he called it, a chance to say goodbye properly. Faithful Friend Pet Cemetery sat just off Highway 40, tucked between pine trees that blocked most of the road noise. The kind of place that felt peaceful during the day and creepy as hell at night. Max His headstone was simple granite with his name and dates carved in clean letters. Beloved companion, underneath. Jessica had picked it from a catalog, crying over every word choice. She brought his favorite tennis ball, buried it next to the stone like some ancient offering. It felt stupid and necessary at the same time. He was a good dog, Dave said, squeezing her shoulder. Jessica nodded, unable to speak. The grief hit harder than expected, standing there in the Quebec pine trees with Max, his body 6 feet below. She started to leave when she noticed the other visitors. An elderly man knelt beside a small grave marked, Princess, Beloved Cat. He was whispering to the headstone like it could hear him. A woman in her 40s sat cross-legged next to a marker that read, Buddy, Forever Faithful. Her eyes were red from crying. Other graves had fresh flowers, new toys, food bowls filled with kibble that the forest animals would probably eat before morning. All these people, still visiting their dead pets like they were somehow still here. Jessica understood the impulse, the need to maintain that connection. But something about the scene made her skin crawl. The way the other visitors moved. Too slow, too careful, like they were afraid of waking something up. The drive back to Vermont should have been the end of it. Dave was already planning their next vacation, talking about getting another dog eventually, moving forward. But that first night home, Jessica heard the scratching, soft at first, like a mouse in the walls, then more insistent, rhythmic, the sound of claws against glass. Just a tree branch, Dave said when she woke him up. Go back to sleep. But Jessica had lived in this house for 5 years. She knew every tree, every sound the wind made through the leaves. This was different. The second night, she set up a camera. The footage showed nothing until 3:17 a.m. Then Max walked into frame like he'd never been dead. Same golden coat, same floppy ears, same excited tail wag when he saw the camera. But his eyes were gone. Not injured, not damaged, gone. Black sockets that reflected the infrared light like mirrors. Jessica watched the footage 17 times before accepting what she was seeing. Her dead dog was standing in her backyard, looking up at her bedroom window with holes where his eyes used to be. She didn't. You tell Dave, how do you explain something like that? How do you make another person believe in zombie pets and supernatural home invasions? Instead, she researched. Faithful Friend Pet Cemetery had been operating since 1987. Family-owned business. Good reviews online. No complaints with the Better Business Bureau. Nothing suspicious about their practices or procedures. But deeper searches revealed older stories. Blog posts from pet owners who experienced similar phenomena. Dead cats appearing in backyards. Deceased dogs standing at front doors. Always at night. Always with the same empty eye sockets. The posts were scattered across different forums. Pet loss support groups. Paranormal investigation sites. Amateur creepypasta collections. None of them mentioned Faithful Friend by name. But the details matched too perfectly to be coincidence. One post stood out. A woman from Ontario whose cat had died and been buried at an unnamed pet cemetery in Quebec. After visiting the grave, her security cameras started showing the cat sitting on her porch every night at the same time. At first I thought it was comforting, she wrote, like Mittens was still watching over the house. But then I realized she was trying to get inside. The scratching got worse every night. More desperate, like she was hungry for something. The post ended abruptly. No follow-up comments. The user account had been deleted. Jessica found similar stories dating back years. Always the same pattern. Visit a pet. This grave at Faithful Friend. Experience supernatural activity at home. Then silence as the posters stopped updating their accounts. What happened to them? The scratching at Jessica's window got worse on the 4th night. Not just Max's claws anymore, but something harder. More destructive. Like he was trying to break through the glass. Jessica installed motion-activated lights in the backyard. Floodlights that would illuminate anything moving near the house. The lights triggered at 3:17 a.m. exactly. Max stood in the harsh white light, completely motionless except for his tail. The wagging looked wrong now. Too mechanical, too fast, like a broken toy running down its battery. His mouth hung open in what should have been a happy pant. But instead of a tongue, Jessica saw darkness, a void that seemed to stretch deeper than his throat should allow. She was dealing with something that looked like Max but wasn't him. Something wearing his shape like a costume. Dave finally saw the footage on the 6th night. That is not possible, he said, staring at the monitor. We buried him. I helped carry the casket. I know. Dogs don't come back from the dead. Jess, this is some kind of hoax. Someone is messing with us. But Dave, his voice shook as he said it. He could see what Jessica saw. The way Max moved wasn't Quite right. Too fluid in some places, too stiff in others. Like something mimicking dog behavior without understanding it completely. We need to go back, Jessica said. Go back where? The cemetery. Something was wrong with that place. Dave wanted to call the police instead. File a report about someone using their dead pet to harass them. But what would they say? That their buried dog was standing in their backyard with no eyes? They think Jessica had lost her mind with grief. The drive to Quebec took 4 hours. Jessica spent most of it reading more forum posts about Faithful Friend Pet Cemetery. The stories were getting clearer now that she knew what to look for. Pet owners who visited graves experienced supernatural activity. But the activity wasn't random. It followed rules. The dead pets always appeared at the same time each night. Always in the same location. Always with the same empty eye sockets. And they were always trying to get inside the house. Why the eyes? Dave asked as they crossed the border into Canada. Jessica had been wondering the same thing. Maybe that is how they see in death. Through emptiness instead of light. That is fucked up. All of this is fucked up. Faithful Friend Pet Cemetery looked different in daylight. Smaller, more cramped. The pine trees pressed closer to the graves than Jessica remembered. Some of the headstones were crooked, like the ground had shifted underneath them. The office was a small trailer near the entrance. An elderly woman sat behind a desk covered in paperwork and coffee cups. Her name tag read, Martha. Owner. Can I help you folks? We buried our dog here a few months ago, Jessica said. Max Richardson. They've been having some problems since then. Martha's expression didn't change. What kind of problems? It's been appearing in our backyard. At night. On our security cameras. I see. Martha opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Max Richardson, Golden Retriever, buried in Section C, Plot 47. She flipped through several pages before finding what she wanted. Yes, here it is. You visited the grave 4 days after burial. Left a tennis ball as an offering. How do you know that? We keep detailed records. It helps with our research. Research into what? Martha closed the folder and looked directly at Jessica. Her eyes were the same empty black as Max's missing ones. Pet resurrection, dear. They've been perfecting the process for decades. Dave grabbed Jessica's arm and started backing toward the door, but Martha raised her hand. Please don't leave yet. You part of the study now. We need to document your experiences. Study? Jessica's voice cracked. Faithful Friend ISM, just a pet cemetery. A research facility. We study the bond between humans and their animals. How strong that bond remains after death. How it can be manipulated. The office walls were covered with photographs Jessica hadn't noticed before. Hundreds of them, all showing the same thing. Dead pets standing outside houses. Cats on porches. Dogs in yards. Birds on windowsills. All with the same black holes where their eyes should be. The bond of love creates a pathway, Martha continued. When you visit a grave and leave an offering, you reopening a door between life and death. Your emotional connection becomes an anchor. It pulls them back. But they not really back, Dave said. They wrong. Broken. They perfect, Martha corrected. They exactly what we designed them to be. Loyal companions who will never leave you. Never die again. Never abandon you. Jessica felt sick. We didn't ask for this. You didn't have to ask. The moment you buried Max here, you gave us permission to include him in our research. The moment you visited his grave, you activated the connection. Make it stop. Martha smiled with too many teeth. It doesn't stop, dear. That is the point. The scratching will get worse. More desperate. Eventually, you will let him inside. They always do. And then what? Then you become part of the family. All of our pet owners do. Eventually. The bond becomes too strong to resist. Martha pointed to a corner of the office Jessica hadn't examined closely. A dog bed sat next to the filing cabinet. Fresh water in a metal bowl. A leash hanging on a hook. But no dog. My Rusty has been gone for 3 years, Martha said. But he still comes to work with me every day. Still sits in his bed. Still protects the office from intruders. Jessica looked around the room again. The photographs on the walls weren't just random pictures. They were documentation, progress reports, before and after shots of pet owners who started seeing their dead animals. In the later photos, the people looked different. Hollow, like something had been carved out of them from the inside. Like their eyes had been replaced with the same black holes their pets carried. You returning people into them? Jessica whispered. Not into them, Martha corrected. Into us. One big happy family of devoted pet owners and their faithful companions. Dave was already running for the door. Jessica followed, but Martha's voice chased them across the parking lot. It's too late to run. Max is already waiting for you at home. He'll keep waiting until you let him in. The drive back to Vermont felt like fleeing from a nightmare. But nightmares ended when you woke up. This was following them home. Jessica's security system showed Max in the backyard before they even crossed the state border. Standing in his usual spot, wagging his tail, waiting. We need to move, Dave said. Pack everything and get out of here. It won. T-Matter. He is connected to me now. He'll follow wherever I go. Then what do we do? Jessica didn't have an answer. The forum posts she read never mentioned solutions. Just people describing their experiences until the post suddenly stopped. She was beginning to understand why. That night, the scratching was different, more organized, like Max was trying to communicate something specific. Jessica watched the security monitor as her dead dog moved around the yard in patterns. Circles at first, then figure eights, then something more complex that hurt her brain to follow. The patterns meant something. She was sure of it. At 4 a.m., Max stopped moving and stared directly at the camera. His empty eye sockets reflected the infrared light like stars. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came through the audio system. He was trying to talk. Jessica grabbed a notebook and started writing down the mouth movements. She'd taken a lip reading class in college for her communication degree. Most of it was forgotten, but some basics remained. Max was saying, love over and over again. Then, miss you. Finally, LETME, let me in. The dead dog was asking permission to enter the house. Maybe that was the key. Maybe he couldn't come inside without an invitation. Like a vampire. But worse. Because vampires were strangers, this thing wore the face of someone Jessica had loved completely. The temptation was almost overwhelming. To open the door. To let Max back into the house where he belonged. To pretend everything could go back to the way it was before the accident. But the empty eye sockets reminded her this wasn't really Max. This was something else. Something that had learned to love by watching from the outside. Something hungry for the warmth it could never truly feel again. Jessica reinforced the doors and windows. New locks, security bars, motion sensors that would trigger alarms if anything tried to break in. But she knew it was pointless. The real invasion had already happened. Max was inside her head now. Inside her dreams, scratching at her thoughts the same way he scratched at the glass. The forum posts had been right about one thing. The bond between pet and owner created a pathway. But it worked both ways. Max wasn't just trying to get into the house. He was trying to get into Jessica. And every night she watched him through the security camera, that pathway grew stronger. She started having dreams where she was the one standing in the backyard. Where her eyes were the black holes reflecting infrared light. Where her mouth moved silently, begging someone to let her inside. Dave noticed the changes first. You were not sleeping, he said. You were barely eating. This thing is consuming you. I can't stop watching him. He is trying to tell me something important. He is dead, Jess. Whatever that thing is, it is not Max. But Jessica wasn't too sure anymore. What if it was Max? What if death had changed him but not erased him? What if he was suffering out there in the cold, unable to understand why his family wouldn't let him come home? The thought broke her heart and terrified her in equal measure. On the 10th night, Jessica made a decision. She disabled the security system and unlocked the back door. If Max wanted inside so badly, she'd let him in. She'd find out what he really wanted, what he really was. Dave tried to stop her, but Jessica was stronger now, hungrier, more determined. She opened the door at exactly 3:17 a.m. Max walked inside like he'd never been gone. Same confident stride, same happy panting, same way of moving through the house like he owned it. But his empty eye sockets tracked her movement with perfect precision. And when he opened his mouth to pant, the darkness inside seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Good boy, Jessica whispered, and reached out to pet him. Her hand passed through his fur and touched something cold, wet, like reaching into a grave. Max nuzzled against her palm, and Jessica felt something shift inside her chest. A loosening, like part of her soul was being gently pulled away. That's it, she said. Take what you need. The transfer was gentle at first. Warm memories of Max as a puppy. Long walks in the park. Lazy afternoons on the couch. All the love she poured into him over the years. But then it went deeper, pulling at parts of herself that had nothing to do with Max. Her childhood memories, her relationship with Dave, her hopes for the future. Everything that made her Jessica was being fed into the black holes where Max's eyes used to be. And in return, she could see what he saw. The world through empty sockets that showed truth instead of light. The house was full of other animals. Cats perched on furniture that wasn't there. Dogs lying on beds that had been removed years ago. Birds flying through rooms that had been remodeled. All the pets that had ever lived in this house. All the pets that had ever been loved here. All of them waiting patiently for their owners to join them. Death wasn't the end of the bond. It was just the beginning of something deeper. Jessica felt her own eyes beginning to hollow out. The physical world growing dimmer as the supernatural one became clearer. She could see the pathway now. The connection that ran from her house to the pet cemetery in Quebec. And beyond that, connections to other houses. Other owners. A vast network of love that transcended death. All of them feeding into Faithful Friend Pet Cemetery. All of them part of Martha's research into the bonds that refused to break. Dave found Jessica in the morning, sitting on the kitchen floor with Max curled up in her lap. Both of them perfectly still. Both of them watching him with the same empty black holes where their eyes should have been. The security system had recorded everything. Dave watched the footage 17 times, just like Jessica had done with the first sighting of Max. He saw Jessica open the door, saw Max walk inside, saw them sit together on the floor as something invisible passed between them. But by morning, the camera showed only Jessica, sitting alone, staring at nothing, talking to empty air like it was the most important conversation of her life. Dave called the police, the paramedics, anyone who might be able to help. But Jessica refused to leave the house, refused to explain what had happened, refused to acknowledge that Max wasn't really there. He came home, was all she would say. He came home and now we're together forever. The doctors called it a psychotic break, grief-induced hallucinations, the kind of thing that happened when people couldn't accept the death of a beloved pet. But Dave knew better. He'd seen the security footage. He watched something invisible drain the life from Jessica's eyes. And late at night, when the house was quiet, he could hear scratching at the windows. Not from outside this time. From inside, Jessica and Max, trying to get out. Trying to go back to the cemetery where they belonged. Trying to bring Dave with them. The scratching gets louder every night. More insistent, more desperate. And Dave is starting to understand what Jessica felt. The temptation to open the door. To join them. To become part of the family that death can separate. His hand hovers over the door handle at 3:17 a.m. The scratching stops when he touches the metal. Waiting, patient, forever faithful. Story 9. Service at the abandoned chapel of Highway 50, Nevada. The hymn drifted through the desert air as David killed his engine. He had been driving Highway 50 for 12 hours straight, and the faint light from the chapel window was the first sign of life he had seen in miles. The loneliest highway in America stretched empty in both directions. Nothing but sagebrush and darkness for hundreds of miles. David's GPS had lost signal hours ago. His phone showed no bars. The chapel, its warm glow felt like salvation. He walked toward the building, gravel crunching under his boots. The structure was small, maybe 20 pews, with a bell tower that leaned slightly to the left. Paint peeled from the wooden walls. The sign out front was too weathered to read, but David could make out the date, 1887. The front door stood open. Inside, thick incense hung in the air like fog. David breathed it in and felt dizzy. The smell was wrong somehow. Too sweet, too old. Hello, he called out. The hymn continued, a woman's voice, singing in a language he did not recognize. The melody was beautiful and sad, like a lullaby for the dead. David stepped inside. The pews were empty, but he could see shadows sitting in them. Dark shapes that moved when he was not looking directly at them. When he turned his head, they froze. Candles lined the altar, their flames dancing without any wind. The cross above them was upside down, carved from black wood. Behind it, a mural covered the wall. It showed people kneeling in prayer, but their faces were wrong. Too many eyes, mouths that opened into darkness. The singing grew louder. David realized it was coming from below. From under the floorboards, he knelt and pressed his ear to the wood. The hymn was clearer now, but the words made his skin crawl. Not a hymn at all, but something else. A summoning, a call to something that had been waiting in the desert for over a century. The shadows in the pews turned toward him. David could feel their attention like cold fingers on his neck. They were not empty spaces anymore. They were watching, waiting. He ran for the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. The handle would not turn. The wood felt warm under his hands, like living skin. The candles flared brighter. In their light, David saw the truth. The chapel was not abandoned. It was full. Dozens of people sat in the pews, all wearing clothes from different decades, all staring at him with hollow eyes. A man in a 1950s suit, a woman in a hippie dress from the 60s, a trucker in an 80s jacket. All of them had stopped here, drawn by the light. All of them had stayed. The singing stopped. In the silence, David heard his car trying to start outside. The engine turned over and over but would not catch. Then the sound stopped completely. The woman, whose voice spoke from beneath the floor, "Welcome to the service. We've been waiting for you." David pressed against the door, but it was solid as stone. The shadows rose from the pews, taking shape. They were not people anymore. They were something else, something that wore human faces like masks. "The chapel has been here since the railroad came through," the voice continued. "We fed the workers then, fed the travelers, fed anyone who stopped for the night." The crosses on the walls began to turn, not upside down, but spinning slowly, like wheels. The mural behind the altar moved. The figures in the painting climbed out of the wall. There were too many eyes blinking in the candlelight. "You cannot leave," the voice said. "No one leaves. This is the last service. The eternal service." David looked around desperately. The windows were boarded up from the inside. The floor was solid beneath his feet, but the singing was still coming from below. There had to be another way. He grabbed a candle and held it high. In the flickering light, he saw a trapdoor near the altar. The singing grew louder as he approached. The voice was not coming from under the floor. It was coming from inside the walls, from inside the wood itself. The chapel was alive. It had been feeding on travelers for over 100 years, drawing them in with its light, trapping them in its walls. The people in the pews were not ghosts. They were part of the building now, part of the wood and stone and prayer. David, his candle went out. In the darkness, he felt the chapel shift around him. The walls breathed. The floor pulsed like a heartbeat. The singing rose to a crescendo. Outside, his car started. The engine purred smoothly, as if nothing had been wrong. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty desert. But David was not in the car. He was in the chapel, sitting in the front pew, wearing the same clothes he had died in. His eyes were hollow now, like all the others. His mouth moved with the eternal hymn. The light in the chapel window dimmed to a warm glow, just bright enough to catch the eye of the next traveler, just inviting enough to make them stop. Highway 50 stretched empty in both directions, the loneliest highway in America. But the chapel was never truly alone. It had its congregation. It had its eternal service. And sometimes, when the wind was right, travelers could hear the singing. A beautiful, sad melody that called to them from the darkness. A hymn that promised rest for the weary. A song that never ended. The chapel waited patiently for the next soul to join its worship. The next traveler to see the light and stop for salvation on the loneliest road in America.